Hi again, guys. It's Mrs. Slimmer here. Today's March the 27th, and I'm here to read again for you and tell you that I miss you, and hopefully you guys are doing all of your work and I don't have to call and harass you. And that's because I just love you. But anyway, let me read what I have to read to you guys today, and I'm going to read from our book Wonder, and I'm also going to read from our 365 Days of Wonder. Today's Wonder excerpt is, "As soon as you trust yourself, you will know how to live." And that was written by John Wolfgang Van Goethe. Okay? As soon as you trust yourself, you will know how to live. So that means you got to put a lot of trust in yourself so that you know how to live. Learning to do that as an adult. So you guys, as soon as you can learn that as children, you'll be better off than I am. All right, here's our story. Wonder. And I'm going to read right from where we left off. Paging Mr. Tushman. I would have been more nervous about meeting Mr. Tushman if I'd known I was also going to be meeting some kids from the new school, but I didn't know, so if anything, I was kind of giggly. I couldn't stop thinking about all the jokes Daddy had made about Mr. Tushman's name. So when me and Mom arrived at Beecher Prep a few weeks before the start of school, and I saw Mr. Tushman standing there, waiting for us at the entrance, I started giggling right away. He didn't look at all what I pictured, though. I guess I thought he would have a huge butt, but he didn't. In fact, he was a pretty normal guy, tall and thin. Old, but not really old. He seemed nice. He shook my mom's hand first. "Hi, Mr. Tushman. It's so nice again to see you," said Mom. "This is my son, August." Mr. Tushman looked at me right away and smiled and nodded. He put his hand out for me to shake. "Hi, August," he said, totally normally. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Hi," I mumbled, dropping my hand into his hand while I looked down at his feet. He was wearing red Adidas. "So," he said, kneeling down in front of me so I couldn't look at his sneakers, but had to look at his face, "your mom and dad have told me a lot about you." "Like, what have they told you?" I asked. "Sorry." "Honey, you have to speak up," said Mom. "Like what?" I asked, trying not to mumble. I admit I have a bad habit of mumbling. "Well, that you like to read," said Mr. Tushman, "and that you're a great artist." He had blue eyes with white eyelashes. "And you're into science, right?" "Uh-huh," I said, nodding. "We had a couple of great science electives at Beecher," he said. "Maybe you'll take one of them." "Uh-huh. You mean we're doing that now?" I'm sorry. So are you ready to take a tour? "You mean we're doing that now?" I said. "Did you think we were going to go to the movies?" he answered, smiling as he stood up. "You didn't tell me we were taking a tour," I said to Mom in my accusing voice. "Augie," she started to say. "It'll be fine, August," said Mr. Tushman, holding his hand out to me. "I promise." I think he wanted me to take his hand, but I took Mom's hand instead. He smiled and started walking toward the entrance. Mommy gave me a hand, and Mommy gave my hand a little squeeze, though. I don't know if it was an I love you squeeze or an I'm sorry squeeze. It was probably a little both. The only school I'd ever been inside before was Via's, when I went with Mom and Dad to watch Via sing in spring concerts and stuff like that. This school was very different. It was smaller and it smelled like a hospital. Nice Mrs. Garcia. We followed Mr. Tushman down the few hallways. There weren't a lot of people around, and the few people who were there didn't seem to notice me at all, though that may have been because they didn't see me. I sort of hid behind Mom as I walked. I know that sounds kind of babyish of me, but I wasn't feeling really brave right then. We ended up in a small room with the words "Office of the Middle School Director" on the door. Inside there was a desk with a nice seeming lady sitting behind it. "This is Mrs. Garcia," said Mr. Tushman, and the lady smiled at Mom, took off her glasses, and got up out of her chair. My mother shook her hand and said, "Isabel Pullman, nice to meet you." "And this is August," Mr. Tushman said. Mom kind of stepped to the side a bit so I would move forward. Then that thing happened that I've seen happen a million times before when I looked up at her. Mrs. Garcia's eyes dropped for a second. It was so fast that no one else would have noticed, since the rest of her face stayed exactly the same. She was smiling, a really, really shiny smile. "Such a pleasure to meet you, August," she said, holding out her hand for me to shake. "Hi," I said quietly, giving her my hand, but I didn't want to look at her face. So I kept staring at her glasses, which hung from a chain around her neck. "Wow, what a firm grip," said Mrs. Garcia. Her hand was really warm. "This kid's got a killer handshake," Mr. Tushman agreed, and everyone laughed above my head. "You can call me Mrs. G," Mrs. Garcia said. I think she was talking to me, but I was looking at all the stuff on her desk now. "That's what everyone calls me, Mrs. G." "I forgot my combination, Mrs. G. I need a late pass, Mrs. G. I want to change my elective." "Mrs. G actually is the one who runs this place," said Mr. Tushman, which again made all the grown-ups laugh. "I'm here every morning by 7:30, Mrs. Garcia continued, still looking at me while staring at her brown sandals with purple flowers on the buckles. Sorry, Mrs. Slimmer talked a lot today, and I'm having a hard time with my words, so you guys are going to have to forgive me for it. But thank you for being here with me and letting me read to you. All right, so if you ever need anything, August, I'm the one to ask, and you can ask me anything. "Okay," I mumbled. "Oh, look at that cute baby," Mom said, pointing to one of the photographs on Miss Garcia's bulletin board. "Is he yours?" "No, my goodness," said Mrs. Garcia, smiling with a big smile now that was totally different from her shiny smile. "You've just made my day. He's my grandson." "What a cutie," said Mom, shaking her head. "How old is he?" "In that picture he was 5 months, I think. But he's big now, almost 8 years old." "Wow," said Mom, nodding and smiling. "Well, he is absolutely beautiful." "Thank you," said Mrs. Garcia, nodding like she was about to say something else about her grandson. But then, all of a sudden, her smile got a little smaller. "We're all going to take very good care of August," she said to my mom. And I saw her give Mom's hand a little squeeze. I looked at Mom's face, and that's when I realized that she was just as nervous as I was. I guess I liked Mrs. Garcia. She wasn't wearing her shiny smile. Jack, Will, Julian, and Charlotte. We followed Mr. Tushman into a small room across from Mrs. Garcia's desk. He was talking as he closed the door to his office and sat down behind his big desk, though I really wasn't paying much attention to what he was saying. I was looking around at all the things on his desk. Cool stuff like a globe that floated in the air and a Rubik's type cube made with little mirrors. I liked his office a lot. I liked that there were all these neat little drawings and paintings by students on the walls, framed like they were important. Mom sat down in a chair in front of Mr. Tushman's desk, and even though there was another chair right there beside hers, I decided to stand beside her. "Why do you have your own room and Mrs. G doesn't?" I said. "You mean, why do I have an office?" asked Mr. Tushman. "You said she runs the place." I said, "Oh, well, I was kind of kidding. Mrs. G is my assistant. Mr. Tushman is the director of the middle school," Mom explained. "Do they call you Mr. T?" I asked, which made him smile. "Do you know who Mr. T is?" he answered. "I pity the fool," he said in a funny, tough voice, like he was imitating someone. I had no idea what he was talking about. "Anyway, no," said Mr. Tushman, shaking his head. "No one calls me Mr. T, though I have a feeling I'm called a lot of other things I don't know about. Let's face it, a name like mine is not easy to live with. You know what I mean." Here I have to admit I totally laughed because I knew exactly what he meant. "My mom and dad had a teacher called Miss Butt," I said. "Augie," said Mom. Mr. Tushman laughed. "Now that's bad," said Mr. Tushman, shaking his head. "I guess I shouldn't complain. Hey, so listen," August. Here's what I thought that we could do today. Is that a pumpkin? I said, pointing to a framed painting behind Mr. Tushman's desk. Augie, sweetie, don't interrupt, said Mom. You like it? Said Mr. Tushman, turning around and looking at the painting. I do. I do too. And I thought it was a pumpkin too, until the student who gave it to me explained that it was actually not a pumpkin. It is, are you ready for this? A portrait of me. Now, August, I ask you, do I look like that? Do I look that much like that pumpkin? No, I answered, though I was thinking, yes, something about the way his cheeks puffed out when he smiled made him look like a jack-o'-lantern. Just as I thought that, it occurred to me how funny it was. Cheeks, Mr. Tushman? And I started laughing a little. I shook my head and covered my mouth with my hand. Mr. Tushman smiled like he could read my mind. I was about to say something else, but then all of a sudden I heard other voices outside the office. Kids' voices. I'm not exaggerating when I say this, but my heart literally started beating like I just ran the longest race in the world. The laughter I had inside me just poured out of me. The thing is, when I was little, I never minded meeting new kids because all the kids I met were really little too. What's cool about little kids is that they don't say stuff to try to hurt your feelings, even though sometimes they do say stuff that hurts your feelings, if that makes any sense. But they don't actually know what they're saying. Big kids, though, they know what they're saying. And that is definitely not fun for me. One of the reasons I grew my hair long last year was that I like how my bangs cover my eyes. It helps me block out the things I don't want to see. Mrs. Garcia knocked on the door and poked her head inside. They're here, Mr. Tushman, she said. Who's here? I said. Thanks, Mr. Tushman, to Miss Garcia. August, I thought that it would be a good idea for you to meet some students who will be in your homeroom this year. I figure they could take you around the school a bit, show you the lay of the land, so to speak. I don't want to meet anyone, I said to Mom. Mr. Tushman was suddenly right in front of me, his hands on my shoulder. He leaned down and said very softly in my ear, It'll be okay, August. These are nice kids. I promise. You're going to be okay, Augie, Mom whispered with all of her might. Before she could say anything else, Mr. Tushman opened the door to his office. Come on in, kids, he said, and walked 2 boys and a girl. None of them looked over at me or Mom. They stood by the door, looking straight at Mr. Tushman, like their lives depended on it. Thanks so much for coming in, guys, especially since school doesn't start until next month, said Mr. Tushman. Have you had a good summer? All of them nodded, but no one said anything. Great, said Mr. Tushman. So, guys, I wanted you to meet August, who is going to be a new student here this year. August, these guys have been students at Beecher Prep since kindergarten, though, of course, they were in the lower school building. But they all know the ins and the outs of the middle school program. And since you're all in the same homeroom, I thought it would be nice if you got to know each other a little before school started. Okay, so, kids, this is August. August, this is Jack Will. Jack Will looked at me and put out his hand. Then, when I shook it, he kind of half smiled and said, Hey, and looked down really fast. This is Julian, said Mr. Tushman. Hey, said Julian, and did the same exact thing as Jack Will. Took my hand, forced a smile, looked down fast. And Charlotte, said Mr. Tushman. Charlotte had the blondest hair I'd ever seen. She didn't shake my hand, but gave me a quick little wave and smiled. Hi, August. Nice to meet you, she said. Hi, I said, looking down. She was wearing bright green Crocs. So, said Mr. Tushman, putting his hands together in a kind of slow clap, what I thought you guys could do is take August on a little tour of the school. Maybe you could start on the 3rd floor. That's where your homeroom class is going to be, room 301. I think Mrs. G is. Room 301, Mrs. Garcia called out in front of from the other room. Room 301, Mr. Tush nodded. And then you can show August the science labs and the computer room. Then work your way down to the library and to the performance space on the 2nd floor. Take him to the cafeteria, of course. Should we take him to the music room? Asked Julian. Good idea, yes, said Mr. Tushman. August, do you play any instruments? No, I said. It wasn't my favorite subject on account of the fact that I don't really have ears. Well, I do, but they don't exactly look like normal ears. Well, you may enjoy seeing the music room anyway, said Mr. Tushman. We have a very nice selection of percussion instruments. August, you've been wanting to learn to play the drums, Mom said, trying to get me to look at her, but my eyes were covered with my bangs, and I stared at a piece of old gum that was stuck to the bottom of Mr. Tushman's desk. Great. Okay. So, why don't you guys get going, said Mr. Tushman. Just be back in here. He looked at Mom. Half hour, okay? I think, Mom nodded. So, is that okay with you, August, he asked me. I didn't answer. Is that okay, August, Mom repeated. I looked at her now. I wanted her to see how mad I was at her, but then I saw her face and just nodded. She seemed more scared than I was. The other kids had started out the door, so I followed them. See you soon, said Mom, her voice sounding a little higher than normal. I didn't answer. Okay, that's it for today. And I hope you guys have a really great weekend. And I just want to tell you I love you and take care and do all of your work. Help out around the house. And don't forget to remember to always be kind. All right, bye.